So when you write Unit 1 competency, it is important that you build a biblical theology basis for the idea of establishing. So all of those verses given there are very critical. Okay. And if you're able to bring in other ideas apart from what is mentioned there, it is good. So your first paper would be predominantly biblical theology, working with these passages and any other passages that indicate Paul was trying to establish the community. You can also mention the tools he used, but more important is the word sterizo. Sterizo, the word for established, the Greek word established. I think it's there in Jeff Reed's article, if you have read Jeff Reed's article.
Yes.
Yeah. So as I see it, I think if they see the word sterizo, they clear the paper. You understand what I'm saying? So for them, the word sterizo is very, very important. So see that your competency dwells on an introduction of the concept of establishing, start with the Great Commission and in the whole idea of continuity with Acts of planting churches, but not just planting, that the apostles really worked on establishing it. The word established comes from the word sterizo, and the idea of sterizo is that that if a work is not established, it will not sustain in the long run. The world would creep into it, wrong doctrines would creep into it and destroy it. So in that, after that introduction, then you are looking at where all the apostles spoke about the establishing and how the establishing is done is coming in subsequent distance. The idea of establishing is what we are talking about in Unit 1, or Paul's concept of it. So you start with Acts, the Great Commission, Acts, the planting of churches. And in the Great Commission, the idea of establishing was very clear, because after you bring a person into the church, you enroll him into a curriculum where you teach him all that Jesus taught. So that second half of the Great Commission, teach all that Jesus taught to obey, was the idea of establishing. Okay. And Paul did it using the personal visits, sending emissaries, sending letters, praying for them. He always mentioned, I pray for you. I don't cease to mention you in my prayers. So you have to explain all that tools that he used for establishing. Also that critical verse about where he would let go of an open door of ministry if one of his churches was in trouble. You need to bring that idea into the picture, so that you need to headline it a little differently and write that part. And from there, you go on to the idea of establishing, of, that he wanted to, the apostles wanted to establish an individual, establish the family, and when a good family household, the whole idea of household texts come into the picture. So how Paul was very particular about the individual household and establishing the household of God particularly. Okay, so bringing the idea of first principles and how the first principles can be used to establish a person can be introduced in this competency. So your first part is the introduction, where you're speaking about a Great Commission, how the planting of churches happened as missions and missionary work, and how that the next step in the process is establishing, explaining the meaning of the word establishing, sterizo, all of those things. Then coming to the idea that Paul was very particular about establishing, even at the cost of an open door of ministry. He would always come back to a church that is struggling and see to it that is established, so that a church would stand on the long run. Why does establishing is required? Because it's a cosmic battle. There is a lot of powers that are coming in to destroy the church. You can see it in the book of Titus, where he says, you need to see that wrong doctrines don't come in and things like that. So you need to bring that concept of why that you need to be establishing this thing, which is all there in the articles, as well as F.F. Bruce and concept. You need to, then after you do the biblical, after that you do the biblical theology, where you pull out all the passages, especially you can focus on what he has already given, Jeff has already given, but focus on it. You don't need to maybe quote the whole passage. Some of them are bigger passages. You can just put the passage, what passage indication as in verses, which verse to which verse, and then write a summary. Or, for example, you would just write Acts 14:21 to 23, and then a title, what it is, a short title, and then an explanation. You don't need to put the verse there. If you put the verse also, no problem, unless it is very big, because Romans 1:8 to 15 is very big. So you can't put all of those. It's like 1 Thessalonians 3:1 to 13. You can just put short, one small title, and write the biblical theology, explain what was the apostle trying to tell in that passage, how the idea of establishing is brought out. So you could easily do about 3 to 4, 5 pages of biblical theology. Okay. Then after the biblical theology is done, start discussing the scholars. So I'd like to share one work, which is, I think is a very beautiful work by Pastor Joseph. And you can just 1 second, hold on. Sorry, 1 second. The way he has done, I really appreciate. Not that any of you have done bad, it's good, but the way he has done this is nice, and I think it's a good example for us to. I've taken his permission that I can share. So, okay, I'm just sharing from Acts Competency 2. So he gives an introduction from a close gathering. If you've seen, he highlights the verses. His text is beautifully put, very nice. Highlights key statements that he's making, and not too much highlights, but he gives a clear picture. I read through the whole thing. So then he starts interacting with the George W. Peters in his book. So I'm saying very convincingly that the whole point, it is all he is writing in his words, what the author is saying, how he agrees or disagrees with it. Thus, it is very true when Peter say that the mission of the local church is to glorify God, leading to the edification of saints. Peter rightly says, can you see the way he's interacting with the article? He's not cut pasting anything from there, but he is stating what the author has said, and he is agreeing or disagreeing and giving his views, or things like that. So this is the kind of interaction we are talking about. Unfortunately, this has made a big bang. See the Orthodox churches in our state of Kerala. It is unique. It is his view. He has read that article. He has brought in his views from his contemporary situation, and he's writing it. So he's interacting. The resource interaction is happening. So a lot of what resource interaction is happening is we are kind of either doing review of literature, cut pasting, or we are just stating what the author is saying. It's not about stating what the author is saying. It's about interacting with what the author is saying, where you need to say what you think about it, what you feel about it. What is it that what the author is saying that you can identify in your contemporary situation? What you cannot, and where you are commenting on that fact that you cannot. Whereas he's taking information from the material. He's definitely taking information from the material, but he's interacting with it rather than reviewing the literature or cut pasting it. Okay, so most of these things that he has put in yellow are very good interactions that he highlighted. Okay, methods used by the initial thing, model church is very, so it's very clean, and he's used font I think 12, and that's done very nicely. So this paper has a good feel, and clarity. He's got a very nice flow to it. He's got charts, got a conclusion, and he has also put up nice the entire thought in pictures, and a fantastic ministry reflection. Our pitfalls, we decide to incorporate the following. So he's talking about his ministry, which is unique to him. So your ministry reflection is not agreeing with the author or disagreeing with the author. You don't need to bring into the author picture at all in the ministry reflection. It is about what you have presented in your competency, the bulk of your competency. Your competency should be about your conviction that you have developed by doing the biblical theology and reading the scholars. Conviction about the early church paradigm, conviction about what you think in your contemporary paradigm, what you thought about earlier, what you did earlier, what you did not do earlier, what you're going to do specifically to you personally or your ministry. That the ministry reflection one should be very critical. It is not saying, yes, I did it, I did it, I did. That may not go well down with these guys. You can have some things that you already, because I think New Life is a lot in the paradigm. So we can have some things that we did, but we can say that this we did not do. And therefore, this is what we are going to do. And it has to be about specifics about which church and which location and all of those things, which makes it unique. Ministry reflection will make your competency unique. Everything else can be similar to somebody else, but the ministry reflection will be absolutely unique. It should be critical. It has to refer to your past. It has to refer to whether you were successful in your past or not successful in your past. It has to refer to how the paradigm that you are now viewing, because you had it biblical theology, because of your cohort discussions, because of your the papers that you read, the theological readings, you are able to see something different. And you're looking at your past ministry and saying, hey, this is what I did right, and this is what I did wrong, and this is where we had our pitfalls, this is where we made our mistakes, and this is where we are going to this is where I'm going to make changes in my ministry. So the ministry reflection should be specific about you, about your ministry. It is nothing to do with the authors. It is nothing to do with anybody else's ministry. It has to be about your ministry. It has to be a critical view. It has to compare, and there must be evidence of the paradigm shift. There must be. So where do you see the paradigm shift evidence? The evidence for the paradigm shift, which every competency is supposed to display because of your learning, is evident in the ministry reflection, which I think we are a lot of the ministry reflection is not doing that right now. But I'm happy that all of our green ticks went through, and but I'm seeing that our ministry reflections are not correct. When I had I had a transaction with Bill on this, and Bill was also very particular. Any queries on ideas, on any thoughts on what I was just sharing with regard to ministry? And what I see is that we tend to put ministry reflection in the last, which is okay, which is what we probably feel that we should do. But because it's in the last and you're like fed up writing the competency, you just want to type in something and just get out. But what I want to let you know is that Bill and myself, we are going to see very much clearly, because he's my coach. I'm a training associate faculty. He wants me to check the ministry reflection, whether it is actually showing evidence of paradigm shift. So we need to see evidence of what you did, and it should refer, your ministry reflection should refer to the bulk of the competency, not in quoting the authors or anything, in the conviction that you developed in the competency. All right, I'm going to stop speaking. Everybody can talk. You can put on your videos and talk. Yeah,
because I started writing the competency. So actually I read the 13 books, and then so I kind of wrote a summary of each of those letters, and then I highlighted the main verses, especially verses which had strengthening and establishing and things like that. And then I wrote how Paul established churches. So some of the points that you said, like praying and then sending emissaries and all those things, I think some 6 or 7 points I wrote. So I was a little bit confused with the order because somewhere in the competency question he has also mentioned about what was what can be taken and what need not be taken. So that point, how do we put and where do we put, as in should we put it like maybe after we say how Paul established saying this is what can be taken forward and this is what need not be taken, or maybe if you can just give some pointers in that.
Yeah. So my sister, you want to say something?
Yes, Pastor. No, I was just saying that what Josh is saying, I think they also wanted discerning the difference between what Paul understood normative for all churches,
correct,
every culture and generation.
Yeah, I will address it. I'll address that. But what about ministry reflection? I mean, were you all able to understand what I was talking about ministry reflection?
I think that one point which you told about the Corinthian church, I mean, that was there in the article also. I mean, Paul leaving an open door and
Josh, 1 second. I'm just trying to get that what I spoke about generally about writing the ministry reflection in all competencies to reflect the paradigm shift is it's important because I think in a lot of the Acts ministry reflection, I don't think that was evident looking back. But we know I cleared it. Bill cleared it for some reason. But of course, Bill picked it up on one of the articles, and now he's grilling me for it. He's grilling.
As far as I'm concerned, I probably have understood now. See, incidentally, the unit 2 was the one which I wrote first. There, apparently, I put the ministry implementation part correctly, so it got clear in the first. But my added unit 3 and 4, it got returned back because of the ministry reflection. But I think now I understood. I have submitted 3.
Pastor, it's not just you. Just your article triggered a storm for me with Bill. And Bill has caught me on my collar now. And Bill is, 1 second, I'm not able to open this. Yeah. Let me just repeat this again. And then I'll come to what Josh is saying and Sumai is saying. Ministry reflection should have very much these things. One, it should reflect on your personal ministry or view of ministry. It can be your church. It can be your own personal as an individual. Okay. Now, because we are all New Life Church people, church, we have to, our individual and church is deeply connected. It should reflect on this. Okay. Here, we don't have to quote any author. We don't have to quote any verse. We are telling, based on what I've understood in the bulk of this competency, in this, this is how my ministry. So it should reflect means this has 2 parts. Past, I mean, you can say present if you want, but that's part of your past, is the future. Future is what you're going to do now that you have understood this or undergone the paradigm shift. Okay. Past is what you did not do, what you did, that has to be clarified. So the ministry reflection has to reflect the paradigm shift. There has to be paradigm shift. Otherwise, your competency will not clear. That is what now Bill is very clear on. Okay. So that means to say, if you are still believing in your paper somewhere that parachurch has its first primary role, you will not clear the paper because that's not paradigm shift. The idea is paradigm shift has to be there. Okay. The other thing is it has to be critical. Now, we all have fear of criticizing our ministry, but it has to be critical. The advantage of this is, one, it becomes truly a ministry reflection. Second, it will automatically clear the optional one, critical, which is mentioned, critical, creative, collaborative. Automatically, the critical is cleared. Then you have to consider only the first mandatory 6. So it has to reflect on your past ministry. It has to be individually or church. It has to be including your past and future. It will not be a ministry that you did. It can be what you believed or what your church believed. It can be mentioned like that, because some of you may not have a past where you were involved in any church planting or anything like that. But you can look at, I mean, I saw Suma in some of her papers very nicely did what her previous church or whatever that she mentioned very clearly. So she reflected on that. Then reflecting on, it should reflect the paradigm shift. That means your ministry reflection is showing evidence of paradigm shift, that, hey, this is what I thought it was. And, you know, now I'm seeing from the scriptures that this is what it is. I'm convinced on this part. Then it has to be critical. That means it has to point out where you are not in alignment with the paradigm, the biblical paradigm, the apostolic paradigm. So these things have to be clear. And let's say it has to be an average average of about 1 to 2 pages. It has to be. It cannot be 3 bullet points or 5 bullet points. Okay, because you are dwelling on what you learned and applying it. This is application. It has to show evidence of application of truth to your life. And the other thing is, because it is about you and your ministry, it will be unique. This will make your paper absolutely unique. Everything else, maybe the scholars, the biblical theology, all have, you can have something similar in everybody's. But the ministry reflection will be unique. You have to mention the name of your church. You have to mention, maybe try and avoid people's names. Some places you can mention also, this is where I am, because your paper is not going to be shown by anybody. Even if I'm going to show it somewhere, I will take your permission, then only show. Okay, so it will make it unique. Okay, many of the ministry reflection is just bullet points taken from the bulk of the competency, and it has nothing to do with what your ministry was. It's just probably belief that you now carry. That is not ministry reflection. Or you have reflected on somebody else's ministry. That also is not ministry reflection. It has to be yours. So one, reflect on your personal ministry, church or individual, past or future. Past can be what your belief was, or what your previous church belief, or what you carried belief earlier to what you think it is and how you think you should go about in the future. Two, reflect the paradigm shift. That means this is where you have moved because of this competency. That movement has to be evidenced. Okay, it has to be recorded. So let me put it here: a movement. A movement has to take place. Okay, this has to happen. Three, it has to be critical. You have to criticize yourself. Okay. Four, average of 1 to 2 pages on a type font 12. You can put 16 or 18 and write 2 pages, will not work. I have somebody who did that. Not in our group, in another group that I'm overseeing. 5, it will make your paper unique. 6, it is application of truth to your life. That means what we learned, we have to apply. So are we clear on ministry reflection? So now I mean, even if I am not, I think Bill is out to get us. So all of your ministry reflections should be like phenomenal. It could be as good as your competency. I mean, any questions on the ministry reflection? Chai, you're also here. Good. Can you all put on your videos to let me know that you are all there? I know that it is dinner time. I don't mind you eating dinner, no issues. But can we just see you, everybody?
Only doing some work, Pastor. But I am also fully attentive.
All right. Oh, wonderful. I like that. Dinner is nicely viewed, Elijah. Good. I'm okay with that. Yes. So my sister, dinner is done or you're about to have? You have muted, sister. Muted.
No, I just made chapatis and all that. They will take, kids will eat at different times.
Okay. Okay. All right. So are you all clear on ministry reflection? You have any queries on that?
When we start writing, we'll have queries for it.
Okay. But have you got the framework what I have made for you?
Yes.
So build it like that. Very, very important. And let me tell you something. It's the most important part of the competency. It is taking it from knowledge to wisdom. It is taking it from theory to practical. It is taking from philosophy to actual obedience and life. So the application part we need to really bring about, and I think they're going to focus on that very much in all our next submissions. And I think all who have not yet submitted acts is going to kill us for it. All of you who cleared it, okay, nobody is going to bother about it now. All that is going to be very clear on the ministry reflection. I think there's some revival in Antioch there. They are very much focused on that. Okay, so now we come to Josh's and Suma's thing. So once you finish the biblical theology and you start interacting with the author, and most important thing is you need to interact with Jeff Reed's article, which is very, very important. Okay, really talk about the idea of establishing and the early letters, the middle letters, and the thrust of these letters, how the whole concept is developed of establishing, which is of course new to us. I mean, we never thought about these things, right? We never thought that even the way that it was written in the sequence, it had an establishing aspect to it. So build it nicely, talk about what you agree, what you heard for the first time, be astonished where you're astonished with the concept. So you're interacting with that with Jeff, which is very important, and he is the author of the whole course actually. And bring in FF Bruce wherever you can. I mean, it's a fantastic article, very beautiful article. And but Jeff Reed's concept of establishing is the key article for the whole course. You should know Jeff's article by heart. Technically, you should be at the back of your hands. You should be able to. And so what I said in introduction, you need to have Sterizo come out very strongly. You need to connect with the Great Commission. You need to talk about the planting and you need to talk about the establishing. Once the establishing mentioned, go into the idea that for Paul, establishing was more important than planting a new church. Okay, and then come into biblical theology and take at least a few nice passages and really work on that. Do a little bit of exegesis and hermeneutics on that passage and draw out the idea of establishing sterizo, or there are other words that are also used for word other than established. So you can pick out some of the other words Paul uses and put that into your biblical theology. And then in your conclusion of your biblical theology, you can write one nice para on the conclusion of your biblical theology, and then go on to resource interaction. Okay, you can take article by article and interact, which is no problem. Or you can have one nice 3 paragraphs on what each author is telling and how you agree, what you disagree, and all of those things. So there are only 2 articles you need to play around with, but interact more with Jeff's article. Okay. After you finish your interaction, make your conclusion from the scholars, and then you would go on to writing the other half of the competency, which Suma and Josh was talking about, is what is normative in the whole establishing process that Paul talked about, and what was cultural. Okay, so what we need to do there is, when you have gone through you already gone through the book of Acts, and you have gone through all the 13 letters of Paul, to a great extent you would have covered or seen a view of Paul, what Paul was viewing, what Paul was seeing all over from Illyricum to from Jerusalem to Illyricum, what he was doing. You would get a bird's eye view of it. So you can pull out some things that will not be, like, for example, he took Timothy, and as soon as he recruited Timothy, he circumcised him. Though for the book of Galatians, he actually defends the whole thing that you don't need to get circumcised. So there's many people ask me why that controversy. Paul defends no circumcision for the Galatian church, but then he picks up Timothy in Lystra, I think, and immediately circumcises him. So why is that? So we need to kind of say that it is not normative for us to work on anything. I mean, we're not going to take somebody and circumcise one. So that's not normative. But there can be a lesson that we learn there in terms of being a Jew to a Jew and a Gentile to a Gentile, in the whole idea of bridging into a culture to share the gospel. So how much will you bridge? How much will you contextualize? Those issues you can discuss in terms of what is normative and what is non-normative. That is one. Second is Paul keeping a vow when shaving his head. I mean, this is an idea that you can think about, which is very tricky one. Then the whole idea of head covering you can bring about. How Paul,
ladies being quiet in church.
ladies being quiet in some of those things, how the role of women was considered in that context. So some of those things can be drawn out and you can write it. So women in ministry, it was one interesting conversation. You can talk about head covering and the whole idea in terms of culture and what Paul believed, what Paul did not believe. We can talk about circumcision, and we can talk about the vows that he kept, which he was a Jew and he was part of his culture. So how those may not apply to us in our context in the idea of establishing in the thing. So some of these things maybe directly not related to establishing, but if you can get any other ideas also, please consider it in terms of, for example, when we talk about the armor of God, we don't see that armor in our context today, right? So when in our establishing process, when we talk about armor, we may have to, how that may not relate to our people today, how we probably need to make it some kind of an understanding to help in this thing. So you can bring out these different aspects of Paul's teachings where he did certain things to bridge with culture, but he was himself that was not particular to the establishing process. Some things that he did was very normative. What was that normative to the establishing process? Follow-up was very important. He went back to the churches. He kept teaching them the apostles' doctrines. He kept teaching them, establishing them in the scriptures. That was he was passing on. He was very clear on philosophy and theology becoming practical. He was very, very clear on. So his first three chapters were always talking about first three chapters was always on the gospel, on the philosophy, on the teaching. The next three chapters of every letter would always be on how it would be practically translated. Okay. So that was key. That was very important. So for him, that was normative. The establishing process was normative, that he would follow up. He would see to it that they're taught. He gave them the whole counsel of God from Acts 17. You can talk about that in the Miletus speech, where he talked about many things in that statement, in that Paul's bidding goodbye to Ephesian elders at Miletus was a fantastic thing about what he did in the establishing process, So you can use that content as some of the normative things that you can talk about. Then Paul's whole idea of why he felt a church should be established in terms of the onslaught from outside. That same thing holds good today also. That we have wrong doctrines, we have onslaught of evil that comes through wrong teachings. So we need to be normative, the fact that we need to establish people in the clear teachings and doctrines of the scriptures. Brothers, sisters, can you just discuss for 5 minutes? I think there's a cake cutting for my wife's birthday. I'll just cut the cake and cut.
Please wish her from us also, Pastor.
Yeah, and we have wishes too.
So, Josh, you already started writing, huh?
Yes, actually, first I wrote those 13 letters. I kind of wrote a summary and the main verses, which had those strengthening and establishing.
Okay.
So then I wrote like how Paul established. And then, only that normative thing I was kind of struggling as in what to put. So, yeah.
No.
How about you, sister?
No, I didn't start. It's so huge. I'm just feeling so overwhelmed, so much to read. And of course, if we just pick out and put it in a nutshell, everywhere it is about, about strengthening, encouraging, but then you have to write I don't know, we have to figure out, and also good you asked, I was thinking, where do you put about normative because every church and every culture had different issues, like in Galatians, he was discussing something, Philippians, he was encouraging, and I don't know. I think it'll take some time.
I'm sorry, I think I missed most of the portion. There was a confusion about the time.
Okay, I think mostly Pastor was talking about ministry reflections, how it needs to reflect what you have actually studied and what we have understood about the articles rather than Sometimes it's just like we copy paste from the what the author intends to say, but it should be relating to what we were doing in the past and currently what we are doing. So that thing needs to be there.
Okay, I'm back. Okay, so are you clear on what's normative and what's not normative? You can really explore that. I mean, as you're reading the articles, what is normative and what may not be normative with regard to the establishing process that Paul used. For example, the household codes. We are very clear that we need an established churches. I mean, established homes in our churches make us an established church. That's a very important thing. But culturally, we may have a different sitting today in the thing. So we have some things may not be, some was normative to Greco-Roman culture, may not be normative to our culture. But the fact that a church should be centered on the gospel and a home should be centered around on the gospel is mandate. So those are the normative, and where things will not be normative, you can. Any queries on that?
So the order pastor, like if we start off with, what are the things that Paul did for establishing, like praying and then visiting, follow-up, sending emissaries, and
then
also
like that, also the sequence of the letters, the early, middle, and late. Those also is also part of the establishing process.
Okay. So like you had mentioned about the, having, separate, like after conclusion of the biblical theology, interacting with the resources, resource interaction. So is it okay if we put it, as, along with establishing, and then what is normative, not normative, or should it be a separate?
No, because you see, when we are looking at the evaluation, we have clarity. You saw past, I don't know if Subhash saw this. I just showed one sample paper. Were you there when I showed the sample paper?
No, I joined a few minutes ago.
No problem.
Sorry.
Okay. So can you see this paper? This is a brilliantly written paper. And it is Pastor Joseph, our one of our colleagues in this. I'm not highlighting him or giving, but the paper was written well. So there are many other people who have written like this, but I've just taken this really well written paper. I can share this paper. I've asked permission for me to share this paper with all of you in terms of the way he has written it. Okay, so he starts with an introduction, goes into biblical theology. That means you can see the verses he's quoting. Okay, he's got a lot of verses and he's really working on that. Okay, and then he goes on to discussing article by article, but he doesn't cut, paste, and drop anything into the paper. He kind of read it and he thinks about it and he kind of tells what they told, and does he agree with it, or he agrees with it, or he considers this is right and this is wrong. He kind of interacts with it. He interacts with what the author said. So very beautifully he has written it. But sadly, the church which lost its vision became an official body reaching out. This gave way to this thing, and then he brings it down to but was not intended for plan of the church needs to get back to its original this thing. And just as set an example, delegating leadership, empowering disciples, giving the authority. So he kind of it is about a discussion he's having, what he is understanding from what the authors are saying, what he agrees with the authors. See, when Jeff is giving us an article to read, those articles may not be supporting the paradigm that Jeff is trying to bring, but Jeff is kind of showing that these are the ways the people think in the world, or the other scholars think about it. So we don't need to agree with everything that the scholars are saying. We need to agree with what we are seeing in the biblical theology and agree with them or disagree with them. We have to. So then he takes the next article and he interacts with it. You can do it this style, or you can interact with all the articles in a single paragraph. Then he takes the next one and but how it becomes very personal is he kind of even though God used these great men in supernatural ways, today's churches have been influenced by the term thing. So he brings it down to his own views of it. Very much he brings it down to his own views of what the things are. So all of these are his own ideas and things that, but of course it's there in the articles, but he's interacting with it. David Hasselgrave. I would also like to, can you read this one? I would also like to give credit to the contributors, Donald McGraven, Ralph Enders, who has combined both mission and evangelism today. And, then in some place he has mentioned about the Kerala churches, what happens there. And, so he's interacting with the article, looking at some of the things that are happening in his contemporary situation. And then he writes a conclusion. Then he puts some of his pictures, thoughts in pictures, which kind of very powerful actually. He puts up, and of course, some of these things we have talked and we have told, and he's picked it up from some of the cohort discussions that he has put up all these things. Some of the pictures that were shown, he has kind of 2 Timothy 2:2, he has picked it up. Something that we shared in this thing. His ministry reflection is original to him. By the grace of God, he talked about 40 congregations and Nepal, and then he talks about it's unique to him. But he says this is what the mistakes that he made, and now we have decided to do these things because thus the book of Acts, along with the reference books, has opened our eyes to look at our own problems and rectify it, so that we could see the local church moving forward and playing its pivotal role. It is giving evidence of paradigm shift for it. So this is a good paper. I'm going to share it on this thing, and so that you can use as a reference when you're writing this thing. So after you finish biblical theology, go into an interaction with the authors. You have only 2 authors to work with. Not much you have to work with. But Jeff, you need to really interact with. Because it's only 2 papers, you can interact as one big paragraph. A lot of the thoughts that are there. Paul's thoughts, Jeff's thoughts that he has shared. Then after you finish the interaction, you go into a conclusion from your interaction of the scholars. Then go into what is normative and not normative, and then go into your ministry reflection. I think your paper will easily go to about 20 pages easily. Comfortably you will be able to.
Thanks, Pastor. For me, biblical theology itself came to 12 pages. So.
Yeah. But I think you would have put the verses also, right?
Yeah, Pastor, I put the verses.
Yeah, that's why it went to 12 pages. You take off the verses, you would easily come down to 6 pages. Okay, so you can take off the verses and put the verse location on, and that is a chapter and verses, and put a title. That's all. Just to put a title or a key verse that you can put from that, and then write your biblical theology. That means your exegesis and your hermeneutics of that. All right. So let's just look at the first issue 1. At first glance, did we do the Socratic questions of first unit? Unit issue 1?
No.
Okay. So let's just look at the Socratic discussion for unit 1, issue 1. At first glance, Paul's missionary activity could appear haphazard and variable to the circumstances he was encountering. However, when closely observed, some patterns seem to appear. To what degree did Paul have a clear strategy as he pursued his missionary activity? Describe core elements of that strategy.
He always had a strategy, is what I believe. He always went from familiar grounds to the unknown.
Okay.
You see him always visiting the synagogues. And when, if he was rejected, people didn't accept, then he moved to the Gentiles and shared. Then he brought them together and taught them, gave them the gospel, baptized, and then he moved on and of course came back to check on them. He definitely had a strategy, and of course I believe that it was all prayers and the Spirit's leading, because when the Spirit did not allow him to go to, I forgot that name, place, he didn't go there.
Yeah,
he was stopped very something.
Yeah, he was supposed to go to Mysia, and then he said, no, go westward.
Instead of taking north, he went west-north. And so all those things, he definitely had a strategy. And
so if I were to draw out some, sister, you hit it on the head of the nail. One is his sensitivity to the Holy Spirit leading in the whole thing. That seems to be very simple. That pattern is seen regularly. If you see in Corinth, when he was in Acts, there is a place where God strengthens him. So he's drawing strength from God. That was something that he was commonly used to do. The other thing is he, like you said, he goes from familiar to unfamiliar. So that's a good one. Okay. Then the other thing that he does is he goes back to the places where he has got a breakthrough, and he seems to work on revisiting that places. And then the other thing is he seems to be commonly doing the idea of placing elders, indigenous people, indigenous elders. He doesn't export elders and keep it there. Maybe he would use for some time, but eventually he wants an indigenous leader to take care of the church.
Yeah.
So that's I mean, those are things that you can, that's a strategy. I mean, we think we covered that very well. Just for time's sake, I'm running. Is that okay what we have talked about there? Others, I hope you're all listening. Yeah, because I'm hoping to see the competency paper uploaded by during this week. Yeah? Okay. According to Paul, what qualities would a church possess if it were established? Very good question. Okay. What was the nature of the qualities Paul used to evaluate the maturity and strength of a church? What does today's evangelical culture consider a strong church? How does Paul's understanding of a nature church, a mature church, differ from the people today's consider solid, mature church? What do you think? It's a very, very interesting question, and a question that we will all fight on. It's important, isn't it? What today you consider as a strong, mature church? Today we consider a church, if you have 1,000 people, you're a very strong, mature church, or very established church.
Very leader or a minister who is very good with his messages and impressive, then everybody wants to flock to that church.
But people consider that as established churches, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
So that's what today people are looking at. But what do you think Paul was looking at?
Churches that were making a difference in the lives of people, really, is what I feel.
This should be drawn from biblical theology, okay?
Yeah.
I think the few points that I remember from Article 1, off the top of my head, is he's checking if the churches have understood what the gospel is. Are they starting to, like, the implications of the gospel? So the understanding of the gospel translates to life and how they live it in their personal, in their family. And the third one was, or the last one was, when they start to expand or go to the leadership level where they are now propagating the gospel to other people.
Okay, wonderful. So one of the things that we would see that homes are established. The individual families in the church is established. Good sound families is a sign of a good mature church. Okay, one. Second thing is you would have people who are showing the mature qualities that Paul lists out in 1 Timothy and Titus for leaders. That is something that is like sowing and harvesting happening within that local indigenous congregation. So that shows that the church is maturing. So you would find people with these qualities, and therefore you can make them elders. So that is another sign of a church getting established. The other thing is a church that clearly understands the gospel. And another possibility is a church that is displaying or adorning the gospel. As in Titus chapter 2, it talks about adorning the gospel. That means witnessing through life to the community. Salt and light, city upon a hill, lamp upon a lampstand, that concept. That means the gospel is working through them. That is another idea of Paul's view of how a church is established. So I think those are good points, and I think Elijah has put amazing points. Suma's points are also good. I think those are enough for us to, and we know what today people are looking at established. If you have fantastic worship, the mood created during the worship music is considered by many today as a good established church. What do you think? Is that, I mean, I'm not against light, smoke, and good ambience during worship. I'm not against it. But do you think that is an indication of an established church? An established church can have smoke, lights, and wonderful ambience. That's possible. But is that an indication of that the church is established?
Here, I think established has two words in it. Like one is strong and another one is mature. So I think two different questions are addressed here. One is which is a strong church and which can be considered as a mature church. So strong church is mostly, I would say, based on the gospel and the didache, the doctrines. And mature church would be more on the implication side.
Like?
The implication of the gospel through the life of the church in involving in the missions and participating in the missions of the church.
Okay, good, fantastic. Good point. Strong and mature, the idea of established. Okay, good. So I think we got enough on that one. To what degree and in what sense are Paul's letters? By the way, some of these Socratic discussion questions and their answers we have discussed can come into the competency. Okay, that's the idea. So you can jot down these points and bring it into the competency. To what degree and in what sense are Paul's letters to the churches normative? Describe how Paul considered his own letters and extent he believed they would serve as normative instructions to all churches. Consider specifically his instructions concerning the establishing process and directives that accompanied them. So I think that's the last part of the competency that we are supposed to write, which we already discussed. I think you should really work on the biblical theology, and as we go through the 13 letters, you should be able to draw out some very important normative things about how Paul saw it as his letters as normative for all churches. Though it was written to the Philippians, though it was written to the Thessalonians, that it is normative and it is important even in our current scenario. That in Thessalonians, that how he wanted to, a church should be established in the gospel. Today, we need to see that our church is established on the gospel. Okay, so that kind of normative aspects we should be able to draw and write it down. Yeah, so this is very important. So in the project question, write a 1 or 2 page annotated summary of Paul's concept of churches. Include a study of Paul's concept of establishing built around the Greek word sterizo and its cognates, which is found in several of the passages relevant issue 1. Issue 1 also include summary of Paul's establishing process. It's directly your, this is the project question is directly your competency question actually. Okay, let's go to the next one. The purpose of Paul's letters in the establishing. So first one was Paul's concept, the whole idea of sterizo, the whole idea of strengthening, the whole idea of strong and mature, things like that. Now here is in the whole process of establishing, what did Paul's letters do? Okay, so each of Paul's letters, be sure to address each cluster of letters with these questions. That means he wants you to address each, that means the early letters and the middle letters and the latter letters separately with these 3 Socratic questions. Okay, let's look at Socratic questions. Each of Paul's letters is varied in content, in length, in severity, and in many other ways. What was the original purpose of each of Paul's letters? How did he use them in the establishing process? That's a very elaborate one. And only when you do biblical theology can you get it. Now you know why I asked you to read all the letters. Because he's asking you to write the original purpose of each of his letters. So you should be able to read, by the way, this not just for writing the competency. I think as a minister of God, as a day in and day out, eating, drinking, sleeping church, I think it's important for us to know this. What did Paul intend out of all these letters? So that's an elaborate work, and I think we should not pass this by. We should not pass this question by, where you're able to see why Paul wrote each of those letters. So you should be able to write at least a 1 page and keep it for you as a separate note, where why did Paul write the letter to the Romans? Why did Paul write the letter to Romans, for example, was not a church directly planted by him, but maybe one of his associates. and he has never met them. So when he's writing the letter to Romans, he is writing in a way to a community that he doesn't know. So what was his whole intention of writing Romans? Where does Romans come? Is it in the early letters or middle letters or in this thing? So we need to kind of place it and then find out what was Paul trying to do by writing that letter. So we should be able to give for all the 13 letters a short summary of why Paul wrote that. I think we should discuss that, and we can do that in the next things. If all of us can take assignments of the 13 letters. Josh, can you distribute the 13 letters to each of us? Each of you, and then we can everyone reads and comes and shares so that we all go rich with the idea of why Paul wrote that letter. Can we do that?
Sure.
Okay. If each of Paul's letters addresses different circumstances that were specific to the churches he was writing to, it would be good to ask if those circumstances were unique to just that particular church, or are they common experiences for all churches? With this question in mind, how do Paul's letters give insight into the process of establishing churches? How do Paul's letters give insight into the order in which churches ought to be established? So very, very powerful questions, okay? So I think if we do the first question, we kind of get the answer for the second one, okay? All of Jeff's questions are decided like that. Okay, if you get the answer for the first one, you get the answer for the second one. It's easy. Philosophies and approaches for growing and maturing churches are abundant in today's church growth principles, okay, which we talk about a lot in today's church marketplace. Still, it is common to find pastors and church leaders who are at a loss as to how they can really mature their churches. How and to what extent does understanding Paul's establishing process provide a fresh approach for coming up with strategies for establishing local churches? It brings down to an application question. That means we read all the 13 letters, we found out each letter for what it was written, and then we kind of see it in the chronological way. Where does it fit into? One is establishing in the gospel, one is giving vision and mission and and then finally building leadership and establishing the household codes is what has happened in the other thing. So we will take each of those letters at each of those three quadrants and kind of look at it and see if they have common themes, okay, and how we can use those themes in our contemporary situation. Does families in our churches have problems? Yes. So then that's an establishing part of our church work. Establishing work is very important there. So like that, we need to are all our people very clear of the teachings of our Lord Jesus Christ? Oh, well, that's part of the establishing process that we need to do. Okay, that they need to be founded on the gospel. Do all our people know how to be a witness in the workplace, in the marketplace? No. Then that's a part of the establishing process, adorning the gospel. So we need to work on all of these things. Okay. So then the project question: write a 1 to 2 page annotated summary of the contribution of each of Paul's three clusters of letters to the process of establishing churches. It's a very, very important question, okay? Because this is all going to come in your competency 2, competency 3. So we probably need to do on that, on the issue 2, the Socratic questions, we need to dwell again after we all come with finding in our next meeting, which is on Thursday. We would come with, if you distribute the books, then we all don't have to read all the books and come, though we have the exercise of reading all the books. But specifically for Thursday, if we can all be given assignments, read the particular book, what was Paul's main theme, how did that theme fit into the middle letters, the central theme of the middle letters, and how that helped in the establishing process, we can put that. Is that okay? Can we do that assignment? It's hard work, but I think we need to get our hands dirty here. Otherwise, if you're just going to, carefully walk over this, get the competency cleared and go out, I don't think it will be useful. Okay, so let's do that. Issue 3, Socratic question. The idea is issue 3 is establishing a church today. That means the whole idea of establishing in issue 1, the use of Paul's letters in establishing churches in issue 2, and the issue 3 is how do we take all that we understood and apply it in our context today? How can we establish a church using Paul's letters and Paul's establishing tools in our context? If you were deciding to start a church, how would you begin? What questions would need to be answered? Describe the process that a missionary team would go through when starting a new church. Brilliant question. This is all, it's like, in your face question for us church planters, stalwarts and experienced people we have done. If you are a member of a team responsible for re-establishing an existing church, How would you go about the task? Beautiful. Describe the process and dynamics that you believe would be necessary in order to bring an existing unestablished church to maturity. It's a good question, but I think we can only answer it after we finish the exercise that we are going to do and culminate on Thursday. Okay. So project, begin writing a provisional strategy for fully establishing a church by drawing upon the provisional work done in the previous projects, which is in the previous 2 projects. Don't worry about the completeness, since this project will be adjusted throughout the course. Because as he said, no, throughout the entire Pauline course, you're going to keep adding to this wealth of data that you're going to pull out from the biblical theology. Think through the life of the church of which you are part. Do the leaders have a clear strategy for establishing the church? It's a good question, okay? You're going to question your pastors. Some of us pastors here will get a little scared, okay? I'm getting a little scared. Is that strategy apparent to you? If you are a part of formal leadership, does your leadership team have a clear strategy for fully establishing the church? Regardless of which question applies to you, attempt to describe the strategy. List the strength and weakness of your observed. Isn't that a fantastic, though that competency question doesn't have all these things mentioned. Some of these project questions are very useful for you in the practical side of applying what you have studied to your ministry today. For example, this question is very nice. Think through the life of the church that you're part of. Do the leaders have a clear strategy? You can actually go and sit with your pastor and ask, Pastor, can I have an interview with you? Record that interview. Ask him questions. Pastor, how do you see the idea of establishing? What is your strategy? Do you think it is important? How long have you been in ministry? What part of establishing was there in the whole thing? How do you recognize, is your church mature? Where do you think it is mature? Can you show me signs of its maturity? You can do a fantastic interview. We will all interview pastors in Japan, actually. All right, just joking, okay, just pulling out pastors' leg. If you are part of formal leadership, does your leadership, many of you are in leadership teams. So then does your leadership to have a clear strategy for fully establishing the church? Regardless of which question applies to you, attempt to describe that strategy. Show the strength and weakness. I think it's a very good exercise for us to do, isn't it? Don't you think, I mean, all of you are in pastoral leadership, most of you are pastoral leadership or in leadership. I think this is something that you can work within your own leadership teams, isn't it? What about sitting one leadership team and just talking about these questions? And, looking at where you're weak and where you are strong, and having done biblical theology and went through all the chapters, all the books and all of the Paul's letters, and studied the whole establishing process. All right, I think we finished. Suma sister, I kept my word. We're now going till 11, okay? We'll have 5 minutes of discussion and we'll close.
Thanks, Pastor.
But was it okay, Suma sister? I did it very fast, but I think we got enough data. Daisy, you're very quiet. Can we all come on video, share our thoughts on whatever we shared, and the assignments? Can we take the assignments? I know that somebody is going to take Romans, which is the easiest book and the smallest book to read. So who's going to volunteer to take Romans? I think somebody should take. Yeah.
I didn't hear exactly what because I was driving a student, and the books you are talking, we have to just read the books and come up with it, or
No, Pastor. What we're going to do is Joshua is going to distribute the books among all of us here. Okay.
Bible books, right? Not any other books.
No. Paul's letters. Okay, because in this competency, we have to study Paul's letters to draw out the principles of establishing. Okay. So each of us are going to be given one book. Somebody is reading Romans will not get a second book. Others who are reading maybe Galatians may get one more book. It will be distributed among all of us. We will draw out for each book why Paul wrote it. And then how that relates to the establishing process. Daisy, you're saying something to somebody. I don't know who it's.
That's what my question is. Why did he write? Why Paul wrote?
You give Daisy trouble. Somebody left. Who's the one who left? I can't remember. I can't see who it is. Okay. Somebody left only. The moment I told somebody.
Elijah.
Elijah left. Shruti is there, so no problem. Okay. So,
Heaven sister.
so Josh, can you I can put up the whiteboard and we can finish the distribution now. Otherwise, we will not hear anybody. We'll all disappear, and then come up on Thursday and.
I'll volunteer for Colossians, please.
Okay, Robin is going to do Colossians. Okay. Josh, can you do Romans?
Okay, Pastor.
Josh is going to do Romans. I mean, you can speed read it, read some good nice commentaries and things like that to find out what the thing. You don't need to break your own head on.
Philemon. Small.
Chai,
Philemon has only one chapter.
no problem.
I will take Philippians then.
Okay, he's going to take Philemon and Hebrews. Okay.
What?
Let's do Hebrew.
That is
One chapter.
Also, actually, Hebrews is not there.
Yeah.
No, I understand, but I think we should keep Hebrews also. I think Hebrews is very important. Okay. So, Shruti, I didn't hear you.
Philippians.
Philippians. Okay.
I'll do 1 Corinthians, Pastor.
Okay. Suma sister will do 1 Corinthians.
First, second Thessalonians.
Daisy will do both the Thessalonians. Good.
Then I will do both then, Pastor, 1st and 2nd Corinthians.
Okay, fantastic. Very, very nice. Okay, Thessalonians. Okay, Pastor Cynthia, which will you do? Ephesians, the mother of all. Pastor Cynthia, are you there?
I think he's showing a thumbs up.
Yeah.
Pastor, you will do Ephesians.
Yes.
So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We are missing still 3 more.
Galatians, Ephesians.
Who is going to do Galatians? Ephesians is done.
Pastor.
Elijah.
Pastor John, Joseph.
Okay, Elijah will do which one?
Why should we alone?
Galatians.
Whatever is pending, let me know.
Galatians. Elijah is Galatians. And what is now? So we have 11 here. We have another 2 more.
Yeah.
Pastor John and Pastor Joseph.
Timothy and Titus.
Which one?
Timothy and Titus. 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus.
Okay. We'll ask Joseph to do 1st and 2nd. Let's say Joseph to do 1st and 2nd Timothy, and John to do Titus. Okay, I will take from Chai Philemon and put Philemon to John. Chai will do Hebrews.
Okay. But that's not in the list, but still.
What's that?
Not there in the list.
No problem. But it should be there. I'm very convinced that Hebrews is so important in the establishing process.
Okay,
So
Pastor.
what we need to bring out, like what is the expectation?
It's here it's a question in say issue number 2, Socratic question number 1. Each of Paul's letters is varied in content, in length, in severity, and many other ways. What was the original purpose of each of Paul's letters? How did he use them in the establishing process? Okay. If each of Paul's letters addresses different circumstances that were specific to the churches he was writing to, it would be good to ask if those circumstances were unique to just that particular church, or are they common to experience of all the church? So you have to relate. Do we face the same situation as we see in the churches there that he was addressing? Is sexual impurity something that is in our churches? Yes. Then how do we do it? Is the vice list and the virtue list, are they relevant to us today?
Yes.
So how do we bring that? So what was the purpose Paul wrote? What was Paul addressing with regard to the establishing part? Are those issues that he is pointing out relevant to our thing or not? Okay. Then you have to write with this question in mind: how do Paul's letters give insight into the process of established church? How do Paul's letters give insight into order in which the churches ought to be established? So you got to use these 3 questions or these 3 Socratic questions to bring out your summary of the book. Is that okay? Josh, Can you take this down and screenshot it and put it on the chat and call Joseph and John also and tell them the good news. Before Thursday, we need to get this out.
Sure, Vatsa. I just took the screenshot. I'll share it.
Okay.
It's a
Pastor,
PPT.
is this Thursday here or next Thursday?
This coming Thursday.
Yeah.
This is compensatory class. This is compensatory class. This is what we missed last Thursday. Your Thursday classes will continue as usual. Hebrews is very small, brother. Just start reading right now, and by that time you should probably finish it.
Yeah. Okay, Pastor. Yeah.
So no PPT and all, no? Just we can just.
If you are creating PPT, very nice, very good. Okay, create PPTs if possible, so that you can share it and people can carry it with them. I'm not very elaborate, but stick to these questions. You should have the answers to these questions in that. Simple. What was Paul addressing? How is that related to the establishing process? Is that situation similar in our churches today? That's the most important thing. How will these things that Paul taught those churches help us in establishing churches today? Then you have an exercise of going to your pastor or going to your leadership team and doing this exercise after being fully equipped in the whole establishing process. Suma, you can question Daisy actually, because you're not part of it. All right.
This last time, the second PPT by Pastor Joseph, does anyone have it?
No, we'll get it. We'll get it for you. We'll get it for you. Okay.
Yeah,
Josh?
he's just message saying he will share it. So.
Okay. So I really appreciate all of you coming at short notice. Thank you. Thank you for agreeing to come today, and sorry for the delay. 30 minutes delay. I'm blaming Pastor Sindipin for that. Just joking. Okay, we had no other choice because there's a very important meeting on March 10th. All of you should be present possibly. It's a memorial of Pastor Sam. We are not doing it as a memorial. We're talking of passing on of legacy. A book is being released on his life, written by his, compiled by his daughter, Pastor Sindipin, as a significant contribution, and others have written to keep that into a legacy form in terms of a book about him. Okay, so keep that also in your prayers. It's very significant for all of us. So we had that meeting. How do we do the? That's why we got delayed. All right, Pastor Sindipin, would you pray and close that based on what we talked today in the meeting?
Heavenly Father, we thank you for, Lord, this time of interaction. Lord, all these, Lord, things that we have studied, Lord, especially about establishing the churches. And in the previous book, the book of Acts, that we have studied so many different things, oh God. Lord, even as we discussed today how the paradigm shift that we have achieved, we have got, will be practically implemented into our own lives and ministry. Lord, we pray that you will help us, that it will not just be an academic learning, but we'll be able to, Lord, really, Lord, practice, implement those things that we have learned about. But that we need your grace. We need not only the insight, but we need the grace and strength for God to implement these things. So especially now that as we are studying all these different epistles and how Paul was establishing these churches, Lord, we pray that you give us, Lord, insight, even as we are going to discuss all these epistles this coming week. We pray, oh God, that by the mutual sharing and learning together, Lord, we all will be enriched. And we thank you for Dr. George and all the others, Lord, even the build team who have launched into this, Lord, this equipping. Lord, we pray that you bless them and bless all of us. Give us a good night of rest, and we'll be able to see another day. And Lord, we'll be able to, Lord, grow in your grace. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen. Amen. So once we finish our Thursday discussion, you would have all the biblical theology you require. By the Thursday after, that is the week after, your paper should be submitted. Okay. All right. God bless you all.
All right.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.